Ahoy, everyone. This is David Perry with my continuing series of interviews with clients, colleagues, artists around the world, and how we get from the great pause of this year, 2020, into the great return. And I'm delighted to be speaking with a photographer whose work is featured in the new book from Gingko Press, Queer Photography, Focus on the Margins. Please welcome Michael Sharkey. Michael, welcome.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. I've known of your work for several years and read a wonderful piece in the New York Times about the documentary that you contributed to about queer youth. Talk to me about how documenting young members of the LGBTQ community became, well, more than a niche for you, a passion. And what have you learned about the community through that work?
Well, let's see. The project began in the spring of 2006. So it's been over 14 years now. And, it's gone through various iterations and moments of intensity and also reflection. It really came about at the sort of beginning of my editorial career as a portrait photographer. And as you may or may not know, photographers, and especially portrait photographers, work intermittently. And so there's a lot of downtime to sort of develop one's artistic style and perhaps other creative interests. And at that point in my career, I felt a need and a desire to sort of embark upon a long-term project that would be a sort of vehicle for me to explore different ways of photographic portraiture. And also to just give myself an opportunity to be my own boss and really make all of those creative decisions myself, instead of with the sort of collaborative help that you would normally experience with an editor or an art director, and really sort of just focus in on the style and the type of approach to a subject that was of most interest to me at the time. And so that's kind of, I as in terms of the subject, as a queer man, it was a natural affinity, and it kind of, it wasn't even like, what kind of project should I do? It just was very clear and obvious to me that this would be an interesting subject to pursue. And I grew up in the 80s. And it was a very different time for young gay people. And so I kind of wanted to see what it was like for the queer youth of today, what it meant, how they sort of identified and defined themselves, and what their sort of social outlook and prospects were, both in the community, let's say at school, but also at home. I didn't really come out to my family until I was around 20 years of age. And these kids were coming out much, much earlier. In terms of I think the second part of the question was, what have I learned? So, fortuitously, the project began at a moment of just incredible transition in terms of social norms, institutional policy, legal legislation, all of this kind of stuff was happening. And within a 10-year period of time, I would say it was something I could not anticipate, but it was a completely different demographic and group of people that I was sort of confronting in the project. So something that had originally began documenting the sort of the budding sexuality of young people and how they sort of identified and related to people of the same sex, eventually became almost exclusively about gender and the way that gender is perceived and also expressed. And now I would say we're sort of nearing another sort of transition or episode in the evolution of LGBTQ activism and culture. And I don't want to try to define it. I feel like the sort of the best thing to do is really just to experience it. You know, I've always thought of the project as a documentary project that I was bringing a very strong creative vision to, but sort of for me, the value of the project is in its documenting of a particular time and place and people. So I really do sort of think of it as a document, and perhaps it's an exceptional document. And if you want to call it art, great. But I do think of it as portraiture, and I do think of it as a document.
So you see yourself as, in a very real way, as a photojournalist.
I guess so. I mean, I would hesitate to venture into the realm of reportage because journalism has its own set of ethics. And I like to sort of not be constrained by those types of ethical concerns, which are very real and should be acknowledged and upheld. But I kind of would like to exist maybe tangentially to that. And I don't think of myself as a journalist. I think of myself as a portraitist. And over the years, I found ways to make portraits of people in a variety of different ways, in a variety of different mediums. And it's, you know, that's part of an evolution for me as well.
You know, there's a wonderful innocent sensuality about your work, seeing these young people on the cusp of adulthood. You said you started this project in 2006. Are there any young people, well, then young people that are now young adults 14 years later that you're still in touch with or still follow? Or have you ever thought about that first group of people that you photographed in 2006 now photographing in 2020 or 2021?
Absolutely. I mean, the first question, yes, I am still quite close with a number of my subjects and have stayed in very close contact with them and see some of them regularly. And that's mostly through social media, but also the ones that happen to live in Brooklyn come visit me at the studio in Red Hook. I've continued to photograph them over the years. There certainly are particular subjects from images that have now become sort of iconographic, at least within the confines of the project itself, that I often think of and wonder about. And I think perhaps one day I will return and visit them again, or perhaps they'll come and find me and visit me. I don't know.
What was it like working with Benjamin Wolbergs on this project, queer photography, new queer photography, focus on the margins, and how did you come to be one of the artists he selected?
You know, I couldn't tell you specifically how he discovered my work. I don't think I've ever learned that. I've also never spoken to Benjamin. We've only had an epistolary correspondence via email. So what I can tell you from that is that he's always expressed an incredible amount of enthusiasm and respect for the work and interest and curiosity. And clearly he has a lot of determination and energy, because to realize a project like this that is maybe not the easiest sell in the world, you know, takes quite a bit of fortitude. I hope someday our paths do cross and that we get to meet each other.
Have you seen now the complete book that it's out with the other 50 some artists in there?
I have only seen a digital PDF of the book in its entirety, which I have gone through a few times, and I'm, you know, totally blown away by the quality of work in there, and humbled to be in such great company. The books that I have ordered, the actual volumes, have not arrived yet, but I anticipate them coming sometime soon.
Yes. Talk to me a little bit about how you would define the secondary title of the book, Focus on the Margins. What to you are the margins that your work covers?
I mean, I guess, you know, literally speaking, you're talking about groups of people that have been pushed to the margin, or have made a conscious choice to remain in the margins. And, you know, these are minority groups. And then within the sort of umbrella of the LGBTQ community, there's an infinite number of sort of like-minded communities and groups of people that find each other and congregate. You know, and I think that that's wonderful. That's one of the, maybe one of the very few things that the internet has been able to provide us with that's positive, is the ability to search out and find people who share your values and your interests. And so, yeah, I guess that's what I would.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear your comments on the internet. I mean, you certainly wouldn't describe yourself as a Luddite, I'm sure, but I find it interesting that you said it was the one good thing to come of the internet. And when you look at your pictures, which are beautiful and painterly, there is a quote unquote old-fashioned patina to them. Talk to me a little bit about that. What is the tone you would like your photos to impact people with?
Well, in 2006, I was still shooting analog film. And so there's a very recognizable and intrinsic aesthetic quality that the film possesses. Digital, like with all sort of the evolution of mediums, digital was trying to sort of replicate those analog qualities. And eventually it's grown into its own form with its own characteristics that are recognizable and can be manipulated and sort of celebrated. But I think what you're recognizing isn't so much the sort of aesthetic quality, but the way that I approach my subject.
Yes.
Which is a kind of maybe, I don't know if I've ever actually tried to articulate this, but I'm not going to say that it's a traditional approach, but it's a kind of formal approach to the subject. So I want to be like fully engaged, and I want the resulting portrait to convey that engagement, so that the viewer can feel a sense of intimacy and a sense of connection to the subject. So I think that that's probably what you're talking about. I don't think that will really ever go away in the way that I approach subjects. I mean, I love a sort of American vernacular, or maybe not even American, but a sort of contemporary vernacular that you achieve with all of the sort of iterations of photographic technique. I don't want to transcend that in any way. I want you to look at my image and be like, that looks like it was made in the early 2000s. I want you to sort of locate it in a place in history, and for that to sort of come through. You know, I also take a million other different types of photographs, lots of snapshots. I make still lifes. That's a different style of photography. But when it comes to portraiture, I do think I have a more, for lack of a better word, formal approach.
Last question for you. When you were the age of some of your subjects, and of course, the subject of this interview, would you have been one of those gay kids that would have been photographed or allowed himself to be photographed?
In the mid 80s, no. But if I had been a teenager in the early 2000s, I think yes. I think I would, and I think this is true of most young people, that they come to a place in their self-awareness and their understanding of themselves that they want to present something to the world, and they want to be seen, and they want to be understood. So I think that that's a kind of almost universal desire that young people have. And Queer Kids really at its heart is a project that just allows these kids to express who they are. And I try to bring a little bit of, what is the word? Magic to the way that they present themselves.
We've been speaking with Michael Sharkey, known for his photographic work documenting queer youth, and one of the more than 50 photographers featured in the new book from Gingko Press, New Queer Photography, Focus on the Margins. Michael, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you for your beautiful work.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much, David.
Ahoy.
See you later.